Genesis is one of the most culturally relevant books in the Bible, and what I mean by that is that the stories contained within this book are well known by people of all faiths. As a kid, you learn about all this stuff through child-friendly media, although some parts of Genesis are obviously left out for kids. What amazes me though is not so much what's in Genesis, but what's left out. We think of these famous stories like Adam and Eve, and we picture a narrative in our minds like Milton's Paradise Lost. But in actuality, the entire story of Adam and Eve is less than 2 pages in my Bible. People also start popping up out of nowhere, like where did Cain's wife come from? The question you need to ask yourself is whether these missing pieces hurt your faith or not. Now when reading Genesis or really any part of the Bible, you're gonna also be asking yourself whether or not you believe in it. But this word belief is a bit vague, so let me try and specify. There are many ways to view the Bible, but here are 5 possibilities that you might agree with. The first is absolute atheist. This view says that this is all fiction and there are no insights to be gained from this book. The second is the moralist view, which says that the Bible is fully fiction, but there are important morals and lessons within that are agreeable. The third is the metaphorical view. This is that the events in the Bible didn't literally happen, however, they are stories inspired by God in order to explain our history in a way understandable to us humans. The fourth view is the gap view, which states that the Bible is a literal account of history, but there are rational gaps in the timeline that allow for things like evolution and other scientific discoveries. The fifth view is the literal view, that the Bible is an actual historical account for our origins. Looking over these views, you'll first notice that you probably won't fit into one of these categories throughout the entire Bible. Maybe in Genesis you take the metaphorical view, but the New Testament can be taken literally. Maybe as an atheist, you really find no moral value in the Old Testament, but when Jesus is talking about love and turning the other cheek, you might fall into the moralist view. Let me know where you fall throughout the book of Genesis. Okay, so that was a lot of introductions. Let's actually now get into the book of Genesis. Chapter 1, verse 1 opens with this famous part. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. In the beginning is referring to the beginning of the time of Earth, not the beginning of all time, because God transcends time and space. But this makes me wonder what was going on before the Earth was made. Was time also not around before the Earth? Or did God also create time when he created the heaven and the earth? Maybe I'm just being too human-brained and I need to stop, but I'm super curious what was going on before God created this Earth. If there was even something going on earlier. This isn't really a point of skepticism, but just curiosity on my part. Still, did the creation of Earth coincide with the creation of time, or did time always exist even if God transcends that time? So God creates stuff, he creates the earth and the animals and all that good stuff, but what really matters is when he creates Adam and Eve. We get to verse 1, chapter 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So this is something that always confused me. Man was created in the image of God, and the image of God is good, right? But why then does man do bad? Obviously because he ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we'll get to, but okay. So man was made correctly and good, but then he ate from the tree and became bad, and we all became bad as a result. That's how I generally understand it, right? So pre-tree Adam and Eve are supposed to be pure and created from the image of God. But why then do they succumb to temptation and eat from the tree? If they're made in the image of God, which we agree is good, why do they succumb to temptation, which is bad? And they haven't yet been affected by the tree. Now as for the tree itself, I find the name interesting. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. One would think, wouldn't it be a good thing to know what really is good and evil? I think it comes down to the issue of humility. Should we trust God, the creator of all things, to tell us what is good and evil? Or should we eat from the tree and believe that we can decide what is good and evil? I think the name of the tree is a bit wrong. I think it'd be more accurate to call it the tree of the attempt to know good and evil. Because even today, there is no one ethical theory as we've seen on this channel. We're still warring with other humans over our human-created ethical systems, rather than trusting the divine's ethical system. So you know the rest of the story. God creates Eve, Eve gets tempted by a serpent, which isn't confirmed to be Satan in the book of Genesis. I don't know where that came from, maybe Milton's poem? Let me know about that. And then Adam and Eve get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, but what's interesting is what God said would happen if they ate from the tree. Here's Genesis chapter 2 verse 17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. And yet they don't die. Physically, that is. There's a couple possible explanations. The most obvious is that they die a spiritual death. The more skeptical atheist explanation is that God changed his mind and is therefore not omniscient. Another possibility is that this is the first sign of God showing forgiveness. Granted, they still get kicked out, but going from a death sentence to deportation is a heck of a win that only a lawyer like Saul could get you. So after leaving the garden and going into the big scary world, Adam and Eve have kids. Their 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Both Cain and Abel work hard and make offerings to God, but while Abel does it happily, Cain does it disgruntled. Now God says to Cain in chapter 4 verse 6, "And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? And why is thy countenance fallen?" Okay, I'm gonna speak up for Cain here. And no, I'm in no way justifying his murder or anything like that. But put yourself in Cain's shoes as to why he might feel frustrated about the offerings. He didn't do anything to get kicked out of the garden. It was his parents. So by being born outside the garden in the world, he's being punished for the sins of his father, essentially. If your dad was living it up in a mansion and had a lot of money, but then lost it all to gambling, and then you were born, wouldn't you be somewhat disgruntled knowing that you could have been born in paradise if not for your father's error? Anyway, Cain slays Abel, and like I said in the intro, this happens so fast and no psychological explanation is given. Cain doesn't have an aside where he's like, darn, that Abel, he's getting all of God's glory. No, immediately after God talks with Cain without any mention of Abel, Cain kills Abel. Now we could speculate all we want and include our speculations in certain media that tell this story, but in the actual Bible it is very fast and missing those pieces. What's interesting is that although God curses Cain, God also does show some restraint in that he goes on to further protect him against others. Chapter 4 verse 15 says, "And the Lord said unto him, Therefore whoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him." You know, it's often said that the Old Testament God is really mean, and we'll definitely get to the more overt examples, but when you look, you do see moments of grace and forgiveness and gentleness. Sure, he's a God of justice, but justice is not just concerned with punishment. It's concerned with what's right. And honestly, after killing Abel, I think God's too lenient on letting Cain go. I'm not an eye for an eye kind of guy, but maybe he should be locked up so he doesn't kill anyone else. After this, we get one of these genealogy chapters, which is honestly not very interesting to me, but if you're into history, you might find it important. But really, I highly doubt any pastor has preached one of these chapters. I mean, what would they even say? But now, we get to an overt example given of God being a bit cold-hearted. The flood and Noah's Ark. So God's looking out onto the world and he's pretty disappointed. But there's a very interesting passage that comes up as he's doing it. "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." Couple things here. One, it seems like we're dealing with an extra evil human, since evil is going on 24/7 in their mind, it sounds like. Like us modern people, we do suck, but we aren't 24/7 always thinking of evil. We have our good moments. So the flood is going to target these purely evil beings, it sounds like. Not exactly people like us who are only evil 23/7. The more important part of this passage is that it says that God's creation made him repent. I remember in my NIV translation that it says that God regretted creating us. This begs the question, if regret is a result of making a mistake, does this imply that God made a mistake? Furthermore, does regret imply a lack of knowledge of the future? I've heard some explanations for this passage, but they weren't very persuasive to me. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now we all know the story of Noah's Ark, and this is probably the one big story that calls into question the literal interpretation of the Bible. How do all these animals fit? How do they sustain these animals for all this time? How this, how that? There's a lot of questions you could ask here, but it's been done to death, so I won't waste your time about it here. So the flood happens and we get to Genesis chapter 9 verse 1. "And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth." Now since we established that the pre-flood humans were extra evil, did God do something to ensure that Noah's descendants would be better? Maybe that's why he chose him? But while we look at Noah as a good person and a hero of the Bible, he, like many other heroes of the Bible, are ultimately flawed. There's another overall Bible theme that we should take note of, that there are no perfect people, and everyone has some flaw about them. In Noah's case, after all this flood business, he gets drunk and naked. His sons cover him up, but when he finds out about this, he curses them. And that's essentially all of Noah. Not a great way to go out, huh? After this, we get some more genealogy stuff and then the Tower of Babel. So everyone on earth speaks the same language and tries to build a tower up to heaven. But God makes a more general but interesting observation. And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. This makes me wonder, for God, is it better that we're united as humans, or more individualized? Outside this passage, I would have imagined that God would want us to be united in our love for Him. But this passage almost says that once we become united, we get arrogant and think we could do anything. But yeah, God changes around some languages and scatters the people around so they can't unite to do things like this. Now, without much of an introduction, God goes to Abraham, now known as Abram, and makes this really important covenant with him. He tells him that he will make a great nation out of him, and bless him, and all this stuff. But again, this kind of comes out of nowhere, and we don't really have an idea as to why this Abram guy, or who he even is. In fact, in the next section, Abram engages in lying. Granted, it's arguably for a good outcome, if you fancy yourself a utilitarian, but it's still lying nonetheless. He wants his wife to tell everyone that she's his sister instead, so the Egyptians won't kill him. But Abram travels wherever God tells him to go, and God makes great promises to him. But there's just one problem. He really wants a kid, but his wife Sarai can't give birth. So Sarai's like, sleep with my maid. So Abraham does that. And Sarai gets all pissed off at the maid for some reason. Sarai kind of chases her away, but an angel comes down to the maid and tells her that God knows that she's going through it and promises her a son nonetheless. Now Abram is 99 at this point, and God shows up and tells him that he has a new name now, Abraham. I'm not too sure of the significance of this name change, so if you know, let me know in the comments. Here we also get the command to circumcise all the guys, which that also I have little idea about the significance of, so let me know that too. Next, we get the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, but Sodom more specifically. God tells Abraham that the people of Sodom are wicked and he will destroy it. Now I might have missed it, but I can't find a place in Genesis which explicitly says why they're wicked. I know through pop culture it's often said that these two cities were wicked in a sexual nature, but I can't find anything concrete in the actual Bible. Now here we get another instance of God being more merciful than typically viewed in the Old Testament. Abraham expresses that some righteous people in these two cities will catch some strays, so to speak, and get burnt up with the wicked. But God says that if he finds 50 righteous people, he won't destroy it. And then this number goes down to 45, then 40, then 30, then 20, then eventually 10 righteous people. If 10 righteous people reside in Sodom, then he won't destroy it. Now based on this number going lower and lower, can we make the assumption that God wouldn't destroy Sodom if there was just one righteous person in it? Maybe it's wishful thinking, but the way this part is written makes it sound like it's a reasonable possibility. So Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed. Remember Gomorrah from Fallout New Vegas? Now that was a real party. Anyway, all this time, God has been promising that Abraham's wife Sarai, now named Sarah, will give birth, even though they're both super old. Well, eventually this happens and Isaac is born. The one thing Abraham really wanted, a son. But just not that other son who gets kicked out. But now comes one of the more controversial parts of Genesis, the attempted sacrifice of Isaac. God appears to Abraham and says, "And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of." And in almost a stoic way, Abraham wakes up one morning and takes Isaac up to the mountain. Up there he binds Isaac, pulls out his knife, and just before he's ready to kill him, an angel comes down and tells him to stop, saying it was just a test set up by God. And he said, "Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me." This part has been heavily scrutinized and debated, with the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard writing a whole book about it. Let's just admit one thing up front. All of us watching would never do this. We could never do this. Even if God himself came down and commanded us to kill another, let alone a family member, I think we obviously have reservations. There might be some nerd out there like, "Oh, I'll definitely do it." But when you're actually face to face with your own family member, I think you drop the knife. Some may see this as a weakness in humans in general, and it perhaps is there to just paint Abraham specifically in a good light, but here's the thing. It seems like the hesitation Abraham would have in killing his son is due to his possessive attitude towards his son, not so much his son's well-being. I know this is a bold statement, but remember the angel's last words that God knows you fear him, seeing as how you didn't withhold your son. Not that God knows you fear him, seeing as how you are willing to bring harm to another living person. And yet the reservations we all probably have with this, if we were put in this scenario, would be out of concern for the welfare of the other person. We're probably not like Abraham concerned for our possession of the other person, but we're concerned for that other person's well-being. I don't think that's a weakness at all. I actually think that's a strength, a positive, and hopefully God can see that our inclination to love thy neighbor will obviously lead us to hesitating if he asks us to kill. So Isaac grows up and marries this girl Rebecca, who I got a problem with, but we'll get to her soon. And Abraham dies. Forgot about that. Isaac and Rebecca have some R-rated fun, and she gets pregnant with twins. God comes down and tells her that the older brother shall serve the younger brother. I hope this does not lead to favoritism. But hey, Esau is born first and then Jacob. Well, hopefully Rebecca can stay neutral about, oh wait, she loves Jacob more than Esau. Eventually this preference turns real sour later on. So Isaac is old and blind and dying, but he wants to bless his son Esau. So he calls Esau to go out there and fetch some venison first. Rebecca hears this and is like, oh no, my favorite son isn't going to be blessed. Let's trick Isaac, who is blind, by pretending that Jacob is Esau. So that's what happens. Some trickery and lying happen and Jacob gets the blessing. Now side note, we see a lot of biblical names used in today's world. We all probably know a Mark and a John, but we also probably know a Jacob and a Rebecca. Now I'm assuming that only the good guys of the Bible get their names used. I mean, who the heck is named Judas? But why then are Jacob and Rebecca's name used then? No disrespect if your name is either Rebecca or Jacob, but really? These are your namesakes? Liars? So Esau finds out about the trickery and gets mad. So mad in fact that he wants to kill Jacob. Rebecca finds out and runs to Jacob telling him to run away. And after he leaves she says to herself, why should I be deprived also of you both in one day? Like you dumbass, this was... Okay, sorry. Probably shouldn't call a respected Bible character a dumbass in my Bible video. Is she even respected? Like, come on. As I was saying, Rebecca, this is your fault. You don't get to complain. This is what favoritism of your children does. And unfortunately, it is a big-ass problem in all of Genesis. Is Esau overreacting? Absolutely. But you had to have expected some hostility after he found out, right? Right, Rebecca? So Jacob flees to Rebecca's brother Laban in a place called Haran. Laban's a wealthy dude with a big family, but one family member in particular catches Jacob's eye, Laban's daughter Rachel. Wait, if Laban is Rebecca's brother, doesn't that make Jacob and Rachel cousins? Didn't know this part took place in Alabama. Now Jacob's like, hey Laban, I like your youngest daughter Rachel. I'll work for you for 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban's like, sure, that works. So Jacob works for Laban for 7 years. After that 7 years, Laban's like, oh, you meant my younger daughter Rachel. I thought you meant my older daughter Leah. Well, here, take Leah, but if you want Rachel, you gotta work another 7 years. So that happens. This is why contract law is so important, guys. Serious talk though, what is the larger meaning of this? Is it to show Jacob's strong love and commitment for Rachel? Is it perhaps to punish Jacob for his trickery against Esau? I'm actually curious, so please let me know in the comments below. So there's some later drama about who's having kids, but eventually Jacob will have a lot of kids, so don't worry about that. There's also some drama about Jacob leaving Laban and Laban getting upset. Bottom line, they get away. God also tells Jacob that, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. But the time has finally come, the return of Jacob and his confrontation with Esau, the brother he betrayed. But upon meeting, Esau runs up to him and embraces him. It seems he forgives Jacob, and Jacob even gives him some presents he got from Laban. The two part ways, and wait a minute, what was all that about the older serving the younger? That message that God gave to Rebecca? When did that happen? If anything, Jacob runs away, comes back, Esau forgives him, and then Jacob gives him stuff. Am I missing anything here? At what point does Esau serve Jacob? Or is this supposed to be a future generational thing? Anyhow, Jacob returns to Bethel, and God affirms with him that he is keeping his covenant that he made with Abraham and Isaac. And the descendants of Israel will be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. That's a weird way to put it. So Jacob takes that multiply part seriously and gets to work, pumping out 13 kids. But before that, we lose a real one. Isaac passes away, and considering how all Bible characters besides Christ have their flaws, even the good guys, Isaac seems pretty flawless. Really, I can't think of something he did wrong except also favoring his eldest son Esau. So good on you, Isaac. Side note, I can't find Rebecca's death mentioned. I found her nurse's death mentioned in chapter 35 verse 8, but no Rebecca. They talk about her burial place later on, but again, nothing about when she passes. Not that I'm intentionally seeking it out or anything, just And finally, we get to the last arc of Genesis, if you could call it that, the Joseph arc. So here's Jacob with his 13 kids, but he forgot to read the earlier chapters, so he decides to favor one of his sons above all the others. This son is Joseph, and Jacob flaunts how much he loves him as opposed to his other sons. Now Israel loved Jacob more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Side note, I'm not even a fashion guy, but a coat of many colors just seems like a visual disaster. Now I have this theme of favoritism being harmful throughout all of Genesis. What do you think will happen when Joseph wears his new coat in front of others? And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peacefully unto him. Joseph doesn't really help his situation out either. He has these dreams from God that show his brothers obeying him. Okay, if that's God's will, then that's God's will. But nothing seems to indicate that you then need to go to your brothers and tell them about your dream, and how they'll all be obeying you. Like imagine if a coworker comes up to you and says, "Hey, I had this dream where I was standing up strong, but you were down on the ground worshiping me." Don't tell me you wouldn't tell him to fuck off with that. Anyway, his brothers react pretty horribly by trapping him and they plan to kill him. But instead of killing him, they throw him into a pit and decide to sell him into slavery to a group called the Ishmaelites. I personally take this early part as a warning against pride. Now, did Joseph have valid reasons to be prideful? Kinda. I mean, he was getting divine dreams from God. Special messages. But even if there is something to brag about, just keep it to yourself and act with humility. You really don't gain much for bragging. You just come off as an asshole and you become arrogant. Now granted, I think the problem of pride in Christianity is thinking you're better than God. It's not so much about your appearances to others. But still, things can be wrong for many different reasons. And even if Joseph didn't seem arrogant against God, he did seem like a bit of a dick. Now at this point in the book, for some reason, chapter 38 just goes off on a side story talking about Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, and it is the most bizarre part of Genesis to me. So Judah leaves his brothers, marries a girl, and has 3 kids named Er, Onan, and Shelah. So Judah gets a wife for Er, named Tamar. But just as we're first introduced to Er, this happens to him. And Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. This to me is honestly one of the most shocking kills by God in Genesis. I mean, it doesn't elaborate on what Er's wickedness was, and it's so abrupt, so if anyone has any other details, let me know. But what makes this chapter even more bizarre is what happens after to Onan, Judah's second son. And Judah said unto Onan, "Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother." And Onan knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Okay, maybe it's just the King James language, but I'm reading this in 2 different ways, and both ways are weird as fuck. So interpretation 1 is that Onan gets ordered by his dad to marry his dead brother's wife and sleep with her. But he pulls out at the end and doesn't impregnate her, which angers God and he kills him. The second interpretation is that some of the older brother's sperm was preserved somehow, and Judah is asking Onan to put his brother's sperm into his wife, but he spills it on the ground, angering God, which leads him to kill him. Please tell me there's a third, more sensible interpretation. Maybe I'm just stupid, but I've reread this multiple times and it just comes off as weird. Extremely weird. But guess what? This one chapter, it gets even more bizarre, if you could actually believe that. So 2 of Judah's sons are dead. But he has that third son, Shelah. But he's not old enough for Tamar, the widowed wife. So he tells her to wait. When he does grow old enough, Tamar notices that Judah doesn't give him to her. So what does she do? She disguises herself and sleeps with Judah, the father-in-law. Yeah, unbeknownst to Judah, but beknownst to Tamar. What the fuck? And once Judah does find out, he's angry at first, but then he's like, she's more righteous than me, because I should have given her my son when he grew up. What? Like, what the fuck? I've got to hear a pastor preach on Genesis chapter 38. I need to know why this is awkwardly interrupting Joseph's story, and why this is so damn surreal. But okay, after that really weird diversion, we get back to Joseph, who's been taken prisoner and is given to Potiphar, a high-ranking official in Egypt who serves the pharaoh. And overall, things are going pretty well for our boy Joseph. He's got a comfy job and all, but then Potiphar's wife propositions Joseph to sleep with her. On multiple occasions, he does the right thing and refuses her, saying that he will not sin against God. She then decides to frame him for making advances, and he gets thrown in prison. So at this point you might be confused, because this guy did everything right in the eyes of God, and he gets thrown in prison. Where's the justice in that? To make a long story short, while in prison he gains a reputation for interpreting dreams through God, and this gets him in front of the Pharaoh himself to interpret his dreams, which he does so correctly, landing him a very comfy second in command only under the Pharaoh. I think the intended moral of this is that although things may seem bad at the present, God has a plan for all of us, and eventually things will turn out alright if we obey him. And this is definitely a comforting thought if you're a Christian, knowing that your bad times are only temporary and a necessary part of God's plan for your brighter future. However, even though this sounds nice, it also confuses the issue of free will. If God has a plan for us and knows how everything is going to turn out, how much free will do we actually have? Are we actually free to act in life, or are we all just chess pieces moving to God's great plan? Like, let me ask you, is Joseph himself special? Like, what does he himself do? He's getting these divine dreams through God, so it's really God behind the wheel in his life. You might argue that when he turned down Potiphar's wife, he was acting by free will. However, God has taken a more than average role in his life, leading him to have these dreams and form a real relationship with him. Would Joseph still turn down Potiphar's wife if, just like you and me, God was mostly silent in his life? I should mention that scholastic philosophy has done a lot of work harmonizing our free will and God's ultimate authority through people like Boethius and Anselm, so I'd probably explore them for more answers. So Joseph helps Egypt survive through this famine, through God's dream interpretation powers. But the rest of the world is not doing so well. Joseph's family back home needs some food, so all the brothers head out to Egypt to get some. Joseph, being second in command of all of Egypt, goes out to greet them, but they don't recognize him because they think he's long gone. Joseph knows who they are, but they don't know that it's Joseph. So Joseph takes advantage of the situation and acts like he's a complete stranger. Is this lying, and how does God feel about this? Technically, Joseph never said, "I am not your brother," but he withheld very vital information. I guess withholding is not the same as lying, but it still kind of rubs me the wrong way how there's at least deception going on. But anyway, after some antics, Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, and they all start crying. Joseph, however, says, "Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life." So this basically confirms that even though bad things may happen to you, they still could be necessary parts of God's plan to ultimately do good. But now, we get some sad news. Jacob is dying. Joseph brings over his 2 sons so that Jacob can bless them, but what a surprise, we get more parental favoritism. Jacob lays out his hand upon Joseph's son Ephraim, who is the younger. Joseph gets pissed off and takes his father's hand off of Ephraim and puts it on Manasseh, Joseph's firstborn. And he's like, "Dad, this is my firstborn, bless him." But Jacob claims that he knows Ephraim will be greater than Manasseh, and can we stop with this? Look, I get it. Children are not all equal, but they should still be treated equally. Think of all the psychological damage this is gonna do. Hey Jacob, don't you remember when there was a lot of favoritism going on with your brother, and how well that worked out? Like, damn dude, even when you're dying, you can't stop yourself from making mistakes. So Jacob dies, and Joseph's brothers are like, we did a really fucked up thing against Joseph. Let's beg for forgiveness from him again. And Joseph replies, "But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to being to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive." So this quote may help with our free will problem. Joseph says that the brothers did think evil, but God meant for their actions to be good. So perhaps we're free to act and think, but the ultimate effects of our actions, known to God, could result in good? I wonder if this makes God a utilitarian. He's not exactly condoning the evil behaviors of the brothers, but he's using it, aka justifying it with the ends, because ultimately, Joseph does save a lot of people by helping with Egypt's food crisis, and that benefit outweighs the pain Joseph went through. Anyways guys, that was the book of Genesis. We have a lot of recurring themes here. One is the problem of favoritism, which for some reason really hit me hard, I'm sorry about that. But then you got free will and destiny, and also the fact that flawed people can still be used and upheld by God. So if you got problems with yourself, don't worry. because you probably aren't as bad as Jacob and Rebecca. I'd also like to mention the declining amount of mysticism as the book progresses. Like, we start off with strong magical elements, with the talking snakes and the giant flood, but in Joseph's story we kinda see a decline in God's magical intervention. I mean, yeah, Joseph is still having magical dreams, but it's nothing crazy and physical. Obviously there's gonna be some more magic as the books go on. We got a parting of the sea coming up soon. But I don't know if anything will really reach the heights of early Genesis. Well, this was a long video, but Genesis I believe is the second largest book of the Bible, so future videos will be shorter, and hopefully come out on time. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like, subscribe, and share this video with friends or enemies. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.